All right, we're just gonna go. All right, I found you. Okay, here's the overall. Hopefully you had a chance and all that time to like look at what we're gonna talk about today, and I'm gonna just get to it so that we can stop saving time. So would love a chance to you guys get a chance to introduce yourselves to each other. I just gave a small brief introduction myself, but would love to just give you a chance to kind of think about this notion of what's an example of, real world powerful learning that you've either experienced or that you've taught yourself. And we're a fairly small group, so maybe just get a chance to pair up with someone else. I'm going to send you to a quick breakout to just introduce yourself to someone, share that example. I'm kind of talking a little bit longer to give you a chance to think of an example that you could share. And we're going to ground ourselves in that kind of real world learning. So we're going to send you to a breakout for just 3 quick minutes. So with one other person. So Stacey, if you wouldn't mind sending folks to a breakout to answer that question, and I'll drop it in the chat so that you have it. But what is an example of real world powerful learning that you've experienced? And just introduce yourself and make a new friend or say hi to an old friend. Stacey, are you ready? Are you already sending
Breakout
people?
rooms open. They're joining now.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Stacey, it's bumpy and I'm sorry, but I guess this is how it goes when I'm rusty on Zoom facilitation. I really have done this before. It's not my first time, but it's feeling like it. That's for sure.
It's totally fine. The only thing I want to ask you is right now, I'm not seeing, I mean, I do see your screen, but it's not a full screen. Like I see you in half of it and your screen in the other half. I don't know if you'd like to make it bigger and like take you out of that other half, if that makes sense. Because I can see you in
Let's
both
do this.
spaces. Like,
Is that better?
yes, there you go.
Perfect. That's
That's
better.
good. That's good.
For
Yep.
some reason, it changed it because it was that, but first time, right? It was
Yes,
content only.
it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why Zoom is changing things up as we move stuff, but it's good to know. Thank you for your feedback. I really appreciate it. Feel free to chime in anytime.
Okay, no worries. Yeah. And let me know however I can help you. It's all good.
Okay. And that one was just 3 minutes. Is it timed?
I did not put a timer, but we
Okay.
would like 2 more minutes.
Perfect. That's great.
And we have one other person that just joined. Hi,
Welcome.
Carolino. I'm gonna send, oh, and Sabrina, I'm gonna put you guys into a breakout room and they're just introducing themselves to each other. All right.
Thanks for joining. It's nice to see you. Get a chance to make a new friend really quickly, and then we'll jump back here and get started.
All right. You should be able to move to a breakout room. Perfect. We'll
There's
give,
actually two videos. One of them is embedded in the sides. I know I tested it, it worked. So hopefully it'll work. It's a minute long, and then there's another video that's a little bit longer. That's the Vimeo one that we practiced with. So hopefully it'll go okay.
okay. I'll let you know. I'll use my voice in case you can't see me to let you know if it's working or not.
That's perfect. Thank you. And then we'll probably have all this like to go back to the slides, but it's going to be okay. We're going to do just fine.
It's all good, Kelly.
Perfect.
We'll give them maybe another minute or two.
Probably just 1 minute, I think, because there is a lot we're trying to get through, and I feel like I've mixed us up a bit on time. So
Okay. I'm closing the rooms. They have
okay,
60 seconds.
great,
Okay.
perfect. Thank you so much. All right, welcome back. Hopefully, I imagine that was probably not enough time to actually talk about your powerful learning. While we're waiting folks to come back from the breakout, does anyone want to share what they heard or their own example of powerful real world learning that you talked about?
I learned that yesterday at Waikula local EO was Kimmy's first time, like being
Mm.
at a fish pond, and how that was kind of transformative in itself for her.
Oh, awesome. Was it the whole day, Kimmy, like actually being on the site, or was there like something in particular that was like a particularly powerful?
I think hearing from Kai was really important for me. I've been struggling a lot with like trying to design some really good place-based units for this upcoming school year for my students and my eighth grade team. So hearing her share about how like there is a balance between like standards, but also like the place-based aspect and how to like integrate and blend those two to show that place-based learning is successful and beneficial for our students was something that I've been like thinking about ever since yesterday and like trying to like chip away at making these place-based projects for my kids. So it's been in the back of my head pretty much since yesterday and seeing how maybe I can get my kids there or to another fish pond. I've been kind of playing with some ideas.
Yeah, that's exciting. So yeah, so this notion of this set of ideas that really pushed your thinking that like moves well beyond that moment, which is probably true for a lot of our powerful moments of teaching or powerful moments of learning, those moments of kind of transformation of sorts. Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm sure that was not fast enough, but thank you for getting a chance to kind of interact with each other and get a chance to make a new friend. So the objectives for this session are really to just gain a preliminary understanding of this concept of improvement science, and how it can help us with transforming systems, to understand some of those principles of it, and then deepen or extend. Ideally, this is going to be related to the STEM² conference and how you can deepen that or extend what you've already been doing and learning about. And then ideally, again, make a new friend is some of our objectives for our next hour. This is just a set of agreements for us as we work together in this next space. The next hour of space is that we stay curious about each other and our work, the content, and then again, just each other is important. Trying to share the mic, taking space, but also making space for others. And feel free to invite others in. You know, if there's somebody's idea that you want to share, please, there'll be opportunities to invite in voices. We want to slow down so that we have time to really think, and hopefully I'll be able to give you some of those thinking spaces and reflecting, not just like talking fast to you the whole time. Expecting a little bit to be messy is a lot to cover in an hour. So there's goes with the last one too of embracing non-closure. This is likely going to be the start of something and not the conclusion or the end all of figuring something out. There'll be a chance to like talk about people's personal experiences too, so respect that confidentiality and like keep those ideas here in the space, or take ideas with you but not the names attached to them. And then try to be present as much as you can. So I know it's harder on Zoom and that we're all doing the best we can with all that we're managing, but try and just in this next hour to at least like be fully present, engaged, because there'll be chances to like interact with each other around what we're hearing. So try if you can to do that. And okay, getting into the work. So like what is improvement? What is improvement work or improvement science? I'll just share, I forgot, in part of my background is that I used to work at the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching that had really taken up the notion of how do we think about bringing a lot of these ideas of improvement science that come from other fields. They've been used in healthcare, it's been used in manufacturing to think about how you improve how an organization works. And one of the things that Carnegie was trying to do is think about, well, how do we bring that to education? There's lots of things, and I'll share a little bit more. So why improvement? One of the things to just note in the graph that I'm showing here is really just this question of, you know, we've been working in education for at least since probably well before many of you were born, but like the 1980s, there have been like reform movements upon reform movements of trying to change education. There's been standards-based reform, there's accountability reforms, there's curriculum reforms, there's thinking about how do you hold teachers accountable. There's just any number of all these reforms. And yet, despite all these investments and all these things, one of the things that was recent research that came out in mid-May from the Stanford Educational Opportunity Project was just this, you know, realization that district level changes in math scores have actually gotten worse between 2015 to 2025. And so 70% of districts have lost ground in math. So that's 7 out of 10, if you were to imagine, and only 30 have actually gotten better. So there's this notion that we're working so hard in education, we're teaching and learning every day, day in and day out, for at least usually 8, if not 10 months out of the year, depending where you go to school. And there's also been this constant sort of churn of thinking about, well, how do we get better at doing that? And despite that, we seem to have stagnated and things have actually gotten worse. And so one of the things to know is that for both reading and math, it wasn't just COVID as the problem, that actually these declines, steep declines, started to happen well before then. And thinking about what those changes are, you know, we've started to come back a little bit, the arrow's starting to go in the right direction, but there's still so much place to go to even just beyond grade level of what we think our students should be able to do, just basic reading and basic math. This isn't sort of suggesting that they need to be rock stars in these things or like the best of the best, but really just like, can our students on average read and do basic math, which allows them, it unlocks doors for all kinds of other things. I also just want to say, I'm looking at test scores. I know this isn't the only way to measure learning. It's one way, but it's an important way, right? So these should be used in constellation with other ways and things that we think about it. But still, if the arrows are going in the wrong direction, that's an important thing for us to pay attention to. Just thinking about Hawaii and where Hawaii is, one of the things that's interesting, particularly for STEM² conference, is that in Hawaii, the math, while reading is sort of on the upswing, math in the last decade has actually fell, and students are, on average below grade level. And then just I put here as a comparison, the other one then is like, well, how does that compare to other big districts or, big places, given that Hawaii is like, a whole state? Then thinking about here, comparison to Los Angeles, while Hawaii is doing better than Los Angeles, it's still below the average in the US around changes and growth in math rates over time. So given this question of like, one of the things to really challenge is it's thinking about how we're teaching and learning, but also how are we thinking about how we go about getting better? Like, how do we get better at improving these things? And what this really points to, and what those of us who do a lot of work and improvement work, is that it's comes from this quote, is that we actually know a lot about how to teach students to read, but we know less about how to build a system that teaches all students to know how to read. And so this is really a systems problem. And so then it targets us to think about, well, what do we know about how you improve a system? And this is where this notion of like every system is perfectly designed to get the outcomes it's getting. So if we're not happy with what those outcomes are, whether it's because students are actually not learning on average or at grade level, or worse, if we were to actually look and disaggregate that, we could see that the students who tend to rely on school the most to think about how to have a more thriving future, and they really rely on school to be those places of mobility, we fail them even more so than we fail others. And so it's a system problem that we need to attend to. So improvement science is this set of methods that thinks about, well, how do you change a system? How do you improve a system? And how do you do that working specifically with the people who do the work closest to it? And so it's not really meant to be this like, oh, we have this solution and we're going to solve it. Instead, improvement science really thinks about, well, how do we organize ourselves to really understand our problems and to really understand people's experiences in the system, because that information is particularly important to think about what the changes are that we would make. So that first principle of being problem focused and user centered is it comes from design thinking a lot, but it also comes from a lot of scientific efforts that really think, well, what do we really understand about the problem? Because it's going to point to what the system aspects are that are getting in our way. And then attending to variability. So it's not just knowing that something works, but knowing what works for whom and under what conditions is incredibly important. You need to be able to actually see the system. So how does the system work? And we're going to focus on that today. And then embracing measurement. So one of the principles is that we can't improve what we can't measure. So a lot of times people will point to things and say like, oh, it's getting better, but we don't actually know that because we don't have a way to know and look objectively to know that something's actually improved. And then we learn through discipline inquiry. So this is for the scientists, particularly in the room, that it's really important that we be really rigorous in how we investigate what we understand about our problems, without bias about what we think is there or what our opinions are. This is also particularly important in today's age, that it's not just, well, I feel like things aren't working. We actually really want to know with data and evidence and be disciplined about that. But then similarly, when we start to make changes and try something out, maybe it's a new curriculum, maybe it's a new practice, maybe it's a new way of thinking about how do I teach students, particularly about any one concept, that we actually do that in a rigorous, disciplined way to write down what we're doing, so that this happens all the time. Teachers, and particularly this is probably true for all those powerful examples that you had of teaching. Some teachers are doing amazing teaching, but we have few mechanisms by which we can share that with others. And so part of that, the reason why we're disciplined about some of our work of what we figure out, is that it allows us to share it with other people. And then it also allows us to really investigate. So again, to answer that question of what works for whom and under what conditions, a lot of times discipline inquiry says like, let's start small and figure out what we could figure out in maybe with one student or one classroom. And then we want to actually then be systematic about how we take that learning to, let's try it with 5, let's try it with 15, let's try it with 25. Instead of, oftentimes in education, we tend to have a solution that we try to implement And then we wait, a couple of years and we're all of a sudden we're like, well, wait, it didn't work. And we don't really know why it didn't work, where it broke apart. And so here we've wasted a lot of time. We burned a lot of people's good energy and goodwill because we weren't disciplined to actually set ourselves up to learn, well, why didn't it work? And what can we figure out about those solutions? So that part about discipline inquiries can be there's a lot to it. And then lastly, the part is like organize as networks. So set ourselves up to learn with each other. And I think for those who were at the Fish Pond yesterday, Kai talked about the COPS networks that she's part of, which are those communities of practice that teachers are in so that they can solve problems together. But that work actually requires setting ourselves up and organizing ourselves in ways to learn that oftentimes in schools we don't do because people are so busy, either just in their classroom or only in their subject matter or their grade level. We kind of have lots of silos for that work. So this organizing as networks means kind of setting up either cross locations, cross disciplinary groups, people from different parts of a school coming together to kind of learn together too as networks. All right, I just said a whole bunch at you and want to give you a chance to just process a little bit of that. But love for you in the chat to really just think about, is one of those principles, resonating with you? And you can just drop that in the chat. So if you want to drop one of the 6 principles, and then another question in the chat. I was going to have you guys do this as a pair share, but because I took too long setting us up, we're going to pivot here a little bit and drop it in the chat. And then which one seems hardest or farthest from like typical practice? So just give you a moment to kind of think about those. You can drop your answers in the chat when you get a chance. Oops. Oh, stay with me, everybody. Sorry. Just trying to charge. And if you're not sure and you want to keep your answer yourself, you can do that too. This is just a chance to think about it and what questions may come up. We're going to dig into them a little bit more. So if you're not feeling ready yet to share that in the chat, I completely understand. But maybe jot it down for yourself. Thank you for those who have put them in. So just for recording's sake, attending to variability resonates the most with me because it relates to our constant need to kilo and adapt, knowing, like you mentioned, what works for whom and under what conditions. The one that resonates for me most was organizing as a network. So thanks for those who've dropped those in. Okay, so we'll hold on to this. You'll get a chance to do a little bit more reflecting too as we go. Okay, so jumping into seeing the system. So part of this notion of seeing the system, which was one of the principles, is really thinking about, well, first of all, just starting with, well, what do we think a system is? Like, how do we define what a system is? And the key parts of system that are important are is that it's an interdependent set of interactions among people, the tools and materials that they have at their disposal, and the processes that they go through which they all join together to accomplish their work. So it can sound very mechanical. I think a lot of times when people think about a system, they'll show like gears grinding and these other things. And one of the things that's really important is that it's people who really operate too in each of these things and these interdependent set of practices among people and the ways in which they do their work and the processes that work. And I'll talk a little bit more about this notion of processes, but people come together in schools and school systems, in classrooms. There's a whole bunch of interdependent things that work together for the ways that those things work. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that those things are working well or the outcomes, but again, it's that idea of thinking about, okay, if these things aren't producing the way that we want them to, then we have to think about how to change the system. Okay, Well, what is a system? There is this amazing, you may have heard this before, but there's this awesome little story or anecdote that talks about, and Peter Senge talks about this in his book, that the ways in which oftentimes we come to think about a system is the old parable. If you asked a set of blind men to describe an elephant to you, they may describe it by, the part that's closest to them. So they might touch and observe, if you're holding onto the tail, you might say, well, an elephant feels like rope. Or, if you're only holding the trunk, you're like, wow, an elephant is really like a tree. It's this like really big thing, thick thing. Or if you're, on top of the elephant, it's like a brush. So it's a little oversimplification of like how you come to understand an elephant, but it's this notion that how we observe a particular thing is really what's closest to us. And so we tend to understand how a system works by our own perspective or where we sit in that system. And what we forget is that there's all these interdependent things that sort of rely on it. Another way to think about it is that 11th grade teacher who teaches a student, they're teaching 11th graders, they're teaching students who have been in a system that's interdependent of all those grades that came before, right? Or the ways in which maybe a science teacher is teaching a particular set of students, but those students are also taking math classes and English classes, and all the interdependencies about how we think about teaching and learning, all those things sort of relate to each other. So one of the things that's really important is systems is not natural to us, in part because it's also, again, it's sort of outside of our view. It's outside of the way that we think about a particular work at any one time. And so seeing those systems, you kind of have to overcome that self-centered view. And this requires, again, this is part of that discipline inquiry to overcome some of our limitations, flaws, or biases about, what we think. This is also particularly important when we start to think about when people describe what's wrong with our system, we'll usually describe it from how we work, but not thinking about perhaps what the others are. And then what happens is when people diagnose that problem and then try to solve that problem, they don't recognize that sometimes by solving that problem, they create problems in other places or may not solve the actual thing that they're seeing, the outcome, because they haven't taken into account the whole system. So part of the way you solve for that is that there's tools that you can use to do this understanding the system. And this is part of that like improvement work. So there's tools to understand the components, structures, and processes that work in a system. There's tools for understanding local knowledge. So some of those tools are things that maybe many of you do. I think it's a little bit more common to if you're thinking about teaching students in a particular context or this idea of place, understanding that place is very important. And so I think tools to understand local knowledge may be really familiar to you. So things like empathy interviews or journey maps. And I'll say more about those in just a moment. And then there's tools to understand external knowledge. So things that are sort of outside of our system, but that are relevant. And so there may be ways in which you understand from research, empirical research of things that have been done, or you can also borrow from other fields and you can bring those into sort of applying it. So some of those tools are things like an expert convening. You might convene a set of experts. You might do 90-day scans. Again, best practice, or that notion of like analogical scavenging. So like in education, sometimes we look to healthcare to figure out, oh, what can you learn about how we think about and how we set up different things? Like for example, when people think about in healthcare, there's a lot of changing of practice to get doctors to use the research that hand washing was particularly important, but you had to change practice. Well, there's like ways in which we can borrow some of those things to think about, okay, how do you create ways of it changing like very particular kinds of practice in teaching as well. So local knowledge with some of those ways, again, like I mentioned, empathy interviews, journey maps. You can also do local expert convenings. And expert is like, this is where broadening the idea of what expert is also particularly important. And then looking at local data and understanding variation, which we'll go over today. And then process maps, design sprints, system maps, stakeholder mapping, and causal system mapping, like really getting to the root cause of something is some of the tools for understanding our system. So just moving into process maps. So all of us, this is what I was saying, a lot of us operate in processes all the time. How we get ready to go to bed at night is sometimes a process that we have, how we brush our teeth, getting our kids to school or how we get to school every day, making a sandwich, getting dressed. There are all these processes that we engage in and day out that really are a sequence of activities that get us to a particular sort of outcome. There's ways in which we do our work. Now, all of those are usually our own individual, but you can imagine a process that happens in a school is every day teachers take attendance and figure out who's in school and who's not. And that information gets communicated to a whole bunch of folks, to an attendance office, to a district office, to parents if your students are absent. So there are processes at play. But part of the problem is oftentimes we're not good at articulating what the actual process is. And when we can't do that, it's really hard to think about, well, how could we improve that process? Teachers do it all the time when they design curriculum, when they think about what am I going to teach today? There's a whole bunch of processes that teachers are engaged in, but we don't make them explicit. And when we don't make them explicit, it's hard to then improve what's happening as a result of that process. Hopefully that point comes through. Okay, just want to share. Here is an example of a process map. So process maps actually have very set components, which I think probably many of you have seen this before, but just in case you haven't, you start somewhere. You always have to like start your process, and then you name a step in the process, which usually shows up in a square. Decision points are often represented with a triangle. And then usually if there's a decision yes, what happens? If a decision no, and then what happens? Another step, and then you can get to the end. So that like articulating what's the beginning of a process and what's the end can actually be really important work for understanding how your system is operating, or something in your system that you're really concerned about is operating that sort of allows you to get clearer. I'm going to give you an example of a case of kindergartners. This is Scott and Michael, and their ability to understand how something was happening in their classroom. So Stacy, this is where we're going to see if this works.
Michael, you brought a flow chart about your morning procedures. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, I can. Well, first we enter the classroom at the beginning of the day. Then we ask you if you have a backpack. If yes, you unpack the backpack and hang it up. Then you go on to the beginning and no. Yeah. Put name up for lunch, sign in, sit down on log, and then sit down on the log and focus on the calendar. And this was much probably going to put a line here so you know what to do after yes. Opposite, like this chart.
Very good. Now, why did you all think that you needed a flow chart for the morning?
Well, because we didn't really know what to do at the beginning of the day. Like first we just sat down on log, then we just forgot to put up our name up for lunch. But then we also forgot to sign in. And we just left our backpacks on the floor.
So using a flow chart really helped you to get things done in the morning.
And you were messing around on the log, and you didn't focus on the calendar.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes we forgot that to put our book bags away. We thought it wasn't even on our back when it was.
Okay.
Okay. I can never get enough of Scott and Michael, and they're like going through a process map. So you'll some of the things that you can notice when you actually are able to articulate the process, there's like a set of questions you can then analyze it. But part of it is also two things are true. One is like you actually understanding what is the process, how does it work? And chances are usually being able to map out that process, you actually have to get other people involved. So this is a chance too for some of that learning about the system from other people. You can, always take a first stab at trying to articulate it, but you might need to bring in other people to also say like, hey, how does this work? What do you think? As a chance, but being able to articulate what are the steps in the process? How long does each step take is a way to analyze it too, because this allows you to start to see where are the breakdowns. What's the order of steps in the process, and are they ideal? We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second based on the example. Where do transfers or handoffs occur? So like who actually owns the different pieces of a process? Sometimes figuring that out can be incredibly powerful because somebody may not actually have the information they need. You may have a time delay, or you get what's called a bottleneck in the process because there's one place that maybe somebody doesn't actually own it, and that can be really challenging. And then, oh, that was the last part. Are there known bottlenecks? So when you map these things out, you can start to analyze it. So this was like as they mapped out, and if you put time on those things, you can start to see where in the classroom they were kind of losing their time. And so they're able to actually then be systematic. This is some of that like scientific, systematic sort of figuring it out. They can track in a week, if the goal was to say, we want to take 5 minutes to get through the morning routine, how are they doing on a day-to-day basis with this process. So they can actually track it and see what's happening from a day-to-day time. And then they can also track, well, where does it break down? So if we were to see like, where are there errors that happen, whether or not, so as they mentioned, like sometimes we don't put our backpacks on the floor, or we show up on the map, or sorry, on the rug with our backpack on, or how many times did students forget to put their name down for lunch? How many students missed signing in, and on which days? And then again, are they on the rug and are they focused on the calendar? And it seems to be you can start to then figure out like what are the errors that are actually, where are we falling down the most? And most often it seems like putting our name down for lunch, signing in seemed like really big ones. That's how often our process was breaking down. So you can track that systematically. Oh, sorry. And so then I forgot to put in there the correction. One of the things that the students did as a result of this was that they decided to change the process because of these breakdowns. They had a change idea that came from really investigating it. And what they did is that when students came in, they put these two steps together. So they changed their process map. You can see here they dealt with the backpack first, and then they went and did the name for lunch, and then these things were two separate signups, and they decided to put them in one so that it would be one step that could also accomplish both of those, save time, and then also hopefully reduce the number of errors of kids who don't get lunch or it's not clear that they're in the room, which is always a safety issue. So they were able to do that because they were able to see, and then they could reduce the amount of time it took for their morning procedure, get it down under 5 minutes, and also have fewer errors. So they're able to do it because they're able to articulate the steps. So one of the things would love for you to just try this out is to map out, spend just like, I'm going to give you, for sake of time, I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I think we can do this. So just 3 minutes on paper, doesn't have to be fancy. You can use a Sharpie, you can use marker, use crayon, use pencil, whatever you want to use. But just try to map out what's the process for you to check and respond to your email every day. What does that process look like? What starts it? What triggers it? What would you put in that start? How many steps are there? Do you have any decision points? And when does the process end? So what's the process for you of checking your email? Any questions before I turn it over to you guys to draw out a process map? No? Okay. All right, let's try it. Let's see what you figure out about your own process for checking and responding to email. Okay, that was 3 minutes. You may not be done, but hopefully you at least had a chance to kind of wrestle with it a little bit. Is there anyone who would be interested in sharing their process for checking and responding to email, even if it's incomplete?
I can share mine.
Thanks, Sarah.
So I said, notification, yes, check and read the email. No, check and read it anyways. And then there's another decision. It says is it from someone important? No, ignore. Yes, draft the response. And then there's an arrow and it says, ask Tammy to review your email. And then another arrow says to send it.
Okay. So how many steps were in your process?
Oh, 1, 2, 3, 5, I think, 6.
Okay. All right, 6 steps. And if you were going to target to say that you wanted to get better about it, what step do you think you might target for, or like what action would you take to maybe there's more information that you need to think about improving that process?
I think I need to reassess the ignore step.
Okay. All right. The ignore, that sounds good. How did it feel to try to map your process?
It's like it was in my head, but it comes back to that idea of what you were talking about, articulation of what the process is. But I also check my email all the time, so it's a habit I need to break.
So it's more like, yeah, does it actually have a start point or is it just sort of constantly happening?
Yeah, like stressful.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sarah, so much for, I don't know if anyone wants to give some love to Sarah. Thank you for sharing your process and being vulnerable with it. I appreciate it. But other people just opening it up for reflections on trying to process or trying to map out this process. How did it feel? Any ahas?
Oh, but we're in the same bubble still, right? It didn't just cut us off.
If you're very near each other,
Oh, that I think is
Oh,
anyone else
I
hearing
saw when
the
when
gather
I-
town
That's a
people?
gather town. I'll go get those guys.
Okay, thanks,
I can
Tara.
yeah, because
see
our
that.
bubble's
Um,
not
Yeah.
private.
That's
Like
okay.
I can make you into a private
I don't know who
bubble,
said sorry.
but
Maybe I
right
think there's
now, if
another.
someone comes
All right,
by,
anyone
they
else want to
will
share
know, look,
a
I'm gonna
reflection
make
on a
you
process map?
start bubble. Now only us can hear each other talk.
Easy, hard. All right, one thing to hold or to think about is like in your actual work. So as a teacher or as a administrator or as a coach or whatever role that you're playing currently in schools, could you identify or think about what might be a process that you could map that maybe could be really helpful as a place to target for improvement? So if you just want to jot that sort of thought down of like, where could I take this in my day-to-day work?
Oh, I think Tara
It's
did
a
well in a Zoom.
interesting thought to think about. Okay. All right, we're going to move into understanding variation, and I'm just going to pivot. There's a video that's about this that really explains this notion of variation as a function of organizational performance. But for sake of time, I'm going to skip that. But I think there's a way, Stacey, is this true, to share these slides so that people have them, right? Is that right? Does Stacey leave? Oh, no, there she is.
Yeah, we'll be able to do that after.
Oh, okay, perfect. And the link for this
Everyone or
video is
just
in
the
there. So if
few?
you're interested in learning more about variation, you totally can. So one of the ways
Oh,
to
I'm
really
glad that.
understand our system is to be able to track sort of data about what we know in relationship to either what the goals are that we have. Maybe it's that we want, 75% of our students passing our class, or maybe we want 85%, maybe we want 95. I really am a believer we want 100% of our students passing our class. But whatever it is, you can set those goals and you can start to track to see like, okay, do we have variation in that? And one of the things that's very important, and that's explained in the video, is that variation in any one system is actually quite natural. We know this from nature. We know this from lots of ways, actually, that variation, even though we said it's the core problem to solve, it's really understanding variation and why we have variation that can be very important. So it's not just the notion of variation overall. It's also, is there statistically significant variation? And then one of the things that we can do is start to understand, okay, well, that in that variation, it can tell us some things that are not good, that we really need to target for improvement. But it also, when we really look at variation, can help us understand who's actually doing really well that we should be learning from. So it can help to identify what those bright spots are. It can also tell us that, okay, if no one is doing what we want to be happening, then we need to redesign the system. The system actually isn't working. So like if we have no variation and everybody's doing the same and everybody's doing poorly, then it really tells us, okay, our system's not working. So there's ways in which you can look at this and sort of attend to it in very systematic ways. So I'm going to give you an example that you want to identify, and part of this work is really identifying what's the metric that we care about when it comes to variation? And this is actually a tricky step that can be really hard. I think particularly in education today, there's a lot of data and we're not always necessarily good about understanding, well, what's that data telling us? And is it the right data that we need? So I just want to like place that as a thought. But if you identify, let's say you're a teacher and you're working on, I want my students to feel like they belong here. And so I have a way in which maybe I have an exit ticket survey that I'm using to know, okay, how are my students telling me on these like three questions from a day-to-day basis? Do they feel like they belong in the classroom? And there's lots of things I'd be happy to talk more about that, of measuring that. But then you got to analyze it to know. So you get this metric, analyze the variation. The first thing you ask is, okay, are there instances that are out of the ordinary? So that's again this notion of if the variation is what's called special cause variation, or it's not typical variation, that typical variation, then we want to do something about it. So I'll show you what that means. You can use what is called a control chart that will help you. This is actually a statistical tool that helps you know what's the upper control limit and what's the lower control limit. So the orange line being the upper control and the pink being the lower control. And then you can see you have lots of variation that's actually anything in between those two limits is what's considered normal variation. And then the other variation that's outside of it, you can sort of see, okay, we have some schools that are doing really, really well on this. And then we have some schools that are not doing well. I don't know, can you guys see my arrow? I'm circling these things. Maybe you can't see that. So when we look at our data in this way, we can start to see who's actually has this what's called an affirming cultural identity cycle. That's what they named it. That's a technical term from this actual data from an actual network. But it's more important to just think about, okay, how do we look at data in a way that tells us something around variation that we can start to then say, okay, can we learn more? I want to give you another example. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what, oh, that is actually what their slide looks like. So this is from a network called the Carpe Network, which is in California. And this was a network of high schools that was really working on post-secondary success. So like our students applying to college, actually going to college and then finishing college. And one of the things that they had figured out was that applying for FAFSA or federal aid funding to go to college was actually a strong determiner of students actually applying and going to school. But actually turning in that FAFSA is a process in and of itself, which many of you may know about. So they were doing work to figure out how do we support more students with submitting their FAFSA, and then they were trying to think about the percentage of students who do this by March. So here is their chart, their control chart. Again, they have their upper control limit, they have their lower control, and then they can start to see the schools in their network of where things are going really well and outperforming what they have as the goal, and then those schools that aren't. So this tells us, okay, there's something to go learn from these places where they're figuring out how to get their students to do this, and then these are schools in our network that probably need a little bit more help. So one of the ways that you can do this to look at data is oftentimes you want to be sort of systematic about it. This may be a protocol that you've seen before, so I'm not offering it as necessarily something new, but I just want to say this is one that you can use, particularly when you're using groups of people who are looking at data together, whether it's student work or looking at grades or looking at attendance data. Teachers look at data all the time, and oftentimes we're put in teams to do that. This is a protocol that you can use to understand variation. You first want to start with C. What do I see in the data? And this is where you want to stick to the low inference facts. So the same things that we would all see, there's nothing questionable about that. The next, you move up the ladder of inference to think. What do I think might be going on here? And everybody gets a chance to say that. And then what do I wonder? What are some of the questions that come up for me as I look at this data? Oftentimes, particularly in improvement work, and this is where some of that being disciplined about things is like the investigations might not necessarily solve the problem. So when we look at variation, we may not just be like, okay, some schools are crushing it, some schools aren't. It's usually then a step to go figure out more. And that's true of like a lot of our work is like, oh, it's going to point us to a learning agenda or a set of things like, I got to go figure out a little bit more, but I'm a little bit smarter as I go do that. So part of it is this protocol. And I would love to give you guys a chance. So going back to your breakout groups, I don't know, Stacey, if you hit back into the breakout groups randomly. And actually, I'm going to drop this in the chat so you can take it with you. I'm going to drop the slides in the chat so that everybody has them. So this will be, I should know this, but I don't. I hope you guys are going to have access to that. And I'm like, maybe you're not going to have access. The other thing to do would be to take a picture of this slide. Let me go back to it. If you take a picture of the slide, you can take it with you into the breakout. But the thing I would love for you to do is just get a chance to try that out, to try out C, have everybody just say, like, is there something I see in the data? Is there something I think about it? So like, what's something that I'm really wondering about? And then something that I wonder. I'll just make clear again too, in case it's not clear from the data, from the way this is represented. These are two, the top one is the data we just looked at. It's the same one, so it's for the whole network. The bottom graph is if you looked at just the percentage of, this was a district that cared deeply about a lot of the inequity was happening in achievement gaps, particularly for Latino male seniors. And so they wanted to know, okay, what do we notice if we disaggregate our data and we look at that for just our Latino male seniors? What percentages are we seeing for our students who are completing FAFSA by March of 2020? Any questions about the activity before I have you kind of go talk to a peer about it and try this out? No, no questions? Okay. All right. Stacy, will you send folks to breakout rooms?
Yep, rooms are open. You may join.
I think just for 3 minutes would be great.
Okay.
It's fast.
Hey, McMahon. So the issue is your avatar is still in Gather. You didn't walk it to the room. So
Oh,
anybody,
Stacy told me I need to do that. Okay. I'll go do that right now. I can do
or you
it.
can just close Gather and re-sign in after you close out of this. But anybody that walks near you, they were just talking below you. That's why you can.
Oh, okay. Hold on. I'll get there.
See that.
Oh, they're at tables. I just walked in on their table. Oh my gosh. I appreciate that. All right. So if I go in this room, I won't hear all of Gather
Yeah.
Town. Okay.
Yep.
And then also we won't notice when I go over time and the folks in my room aren't in the closing.
Well, you're not overtime yet. The one other room let out way early. So
Oh, okay.
all those people came from a room that let out early. So I'm gonna go check on them.
Okay. I'm gonna try to go back to my slides.
And then I think we want to be done here at 12:20 at the latest. So we'll just close up and then maybe you can have some questions.
Yep. That's what I was gonna do. That's the
Okay.
plan. Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate it. And then right now, you're probably seeing not the slideshow view, right?
No, I see your desktop.
I don't know why. You see the overall desktop, you don't see the slides at all?
I see your slides. So it's
Okay.
it's still fine. Yeah.
Okay. But it's not, no, but it's not why isn't it doing I'm just gonna do this. That's better?
Yep, that's good. That's perfect.
Thank you. Oh, I'm gonna go back.
Okay, I'm gonna close the room so that they have 60 seconds to get back.
Perfect.
And
Thanks,
then
Stacy.
we'll wrap up. Okay.
Welcome back. I know that was a really unsatisfactory amount of time to be able to have that kind of conversation, but or at least try out the protocol. Do we have everybody? No, we're missing room 3, right? Okay. All right, but while the folks that are here, welcome a chance to get a chance, any ahas in doing this activity? Or getting a chance to talk about it in this way? Welcome back. I know that was really rushed, but hopefully there was at least a chance to get like a brief moment of engaging with it in this way. Anyone want to share any ahas that you had in trying it out? Or a question that came up for you? Anyone have a question? Like, what is School H doing that seems to be working so well for so many students as well as the Latino male students? Some of the things to just sort of know, I'll just call them out and maybe for place of time. This is terrible teaching. Please don't do this. Where I've like asked you a question and now I'm just going to talk over you. But for sake of time, I'm going to. So for example, if we had only looked at the data variation, a school like School N, you'd be like, oh, they're doing well. They're doing okay. They're a little below the line, but they're within normal variation. When we disaggregate the data, though, and we ask like, who's this working for and under what conditions? When we look at Latino males who we care about, we can see they're actually not doing well with the population of students that we really want them to be. So one of the reasons why we look at variation is oftentimes when we think about and try to understand our problem or what's happening in our system, we think we understand the problem, but we don't necessarily look at data. And again, that's where the like where I sit, I'm like, oh, my students seem to be doing fine. Actually, this happened to me when I was when I was first student teaching. I thought me and my students had the best time. I thought our class was like so fun and it was great. And then I watched a video of myself teaching. I never smiled once. I was like, oh my God, there's no way we're having fun. Like, I look so serious. It's terrible. So I needed that objective data to kind of challenge my bias about what I thought was actually happening, right? So, like, this notion of thinking about how do we understand, how do we diagnose what the problem is versus what do we think the solutions are? And then also the opportunity to kind of go learn from who's doing really well at this. Because I think a lot of times we think about solving our systems, we actually forget that there are some people that are doing really, really well and that there's an opportunity. We don't have to like change everything because there are some people who have figured it out. And what could we do to spread that knowledge to more people that could be really helpful? So hopefully this like looking at variation, I know we're tight on time. So I'm just going to leave this and close this out with a couple of final reflections. I'm grateful that you came to this. I'm hoping that you got to see like part of what we think about solving our systems is there actually are methods that we can do to solve these things. There's things that we can learn about to get more systematic. So it's not just solving the problems, it's actually getting better at changing our system so that we learn how to do that well. And then two of the principles that we talked about were seeing the system and understanding variation. And part of improvement science, some of the connections here is that a lot of this work is really connected. And I am terrible with the Hawaiian pronunciation, so I feel like I'm just going to be offensive and try and pronounce those. But it is like through the core aspect of the work of STEM squared around learning through doing. So some of this work is actually going out and learning and doing things, not just like reading about it in a book, but actually going and seeing practice or digging in and trying to understand it, going and talking to people. And then the last one is the Makaweli, which I probably also just destroyed, but the literally meaning 8 eyes of where you need multiple perspectives when you do system transformation work. And again, there's tools to be able to do that. I know we're at time and I need to send you, I'm a little bit over, but if you just want to drop in the chat as you're leaving, but like something that you're taking away with you, or a question, I'd love to just hear your thoughts. So if you could drop it in the chat, something that either it's an open question or something that resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Or if you want to say it, if you want to unmute and say it as you leave, if that's easier, welcome a chance for people to do that. So anything that you're sitting with, it's either an open question or something you're taking away. Sarah, I hope you'll share. I don't know what.
No, I read Lisa's and then I thought of Stacy, so just really cool.
Oh, thank you so much. People are just a special kind of people. Okay. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I know I shared a lot and said a lot and I didn't use time well. I welcome your feedback at any point if you want to share it with me later and then also in the slides. But I thank you all